Hi, this is Coach Dorf. We're in section 1.4 on exponents, and we're going to look at the following example that's similar to a homework problem. In this problem here, we're supposed to simplify these expressions using the laws of exponents. So let's start with part A. So in part A, we have x to the ninth times parentheses 2x all to the fourth over x cubed. Now, the first thing I would do on this one is I've got that parentheses x to the fourth. That means I need to distribute that fourth power to everything that's inside the parentheses. That includes the 2 and the x. So I'm going to write down my x to the ninth, and then I have 2 to the fourth, x to the fourth, all over x cubed. Now, 2 to the fourth is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, which is 16. So I have 16. And then I have an x to the ninth, and I have an x to the fourth. And I can bring that x to the cube that's in the denominator up to the top if I change its sign from a 3 to a negative 3. So now I have this. Everything that has the same base, I can add the exponents together. So I have an x to the ninth, x to the fourth, and x to the negative 3. They all have a base of x. So I can rewrite that as 16 times x to the 9 plus 4 minus 3 power. And then I just add those exponents together. 9 plus 4 is 13, minus 3 is 10. So I get 16 x to the 10th. And that's my answer. All right, the second one, we have 64 to the negative 4/3. All right, first of all, what does the negative mean in an exponent? The negative means that it's the same thing as 1 over that to the positive exponent. All right, so I could rewrite this as 1 over 64 to the 4/3 power. A negative exponent is the same thing as 1 over that to the positive exponent. Now, what about the 4/3? That means I'm going to take my number, I'm going to take the third root of it, the number in the denominator, and then I'm going to put it to the fourth power. So one way to solve this problem is to say to yourself, what number times itself 3 times gives me 64? And that would be taking the third root of 64. And then I would take that final answer, or that answer, and put it to the fourth power, and I would be done. But I think it might be easier to see if I show this a different way. So let's look at 64 to the 4/3 power. What I want to do is I want to break 64 up into all its factors. So what times what gives me 64? Well, I know 2 times 32 would work. And now I can break down 32 into 2 times 2 times 16. And then I realize that 16 is the same thing as 2 times 2, and 16 is 4 times 4. And if I keep going this way, I'm going to get 2 to the 6th. So 64 is 2 to the 6th. If I would take 2, multiply it by itself 6 times, I'd get 64. So I can write 64 to the 2 to the 4/3 as 2 to the 6th to the 4/3. Now, a property of the laws of exponents is if I have something with a power to a power, I multiply the powers together. So this is going to be 2 to the 6th times the 4th times 4/3. And 6 times 4/3, when I do that, multiply the tops together, I get 24. 6 times 4 is 24 over 3. That becomes 8. And so I get 2 to the 8th here. And what is 2 to the 8th? Well, 2 to the 8th is really going to be just like 64 times 2 times 2, which is going to be 256. There's lots of different ways you could do it. You could also think of 2 to the 8th as 2 to the 4th times 2 to the 4th, which is 16 times 16, which would be 256. Or you could just multiply 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 8 times and get 256. So that's 256. So if I go back to my original problem, this is going to be 1 over 256. Again, the idea here, 2 things to remember. One is that if you have a negative exponent, it's the same thing as 1 over that to the positive exponent, which is what we got here in these steps. And then the second thing to remember is that when you have a fractional exponent, it means that you're going to rewrite it in so that you can use the properties of the exponents there so I can multiply them together. Let's go on to the third one here, letter C. And letter C is, I've got this here, and that's to the third power. So what does this mean here? This square root with an 8 out front. It means the 8th root of it. So I can think of the top as x to the 5th all over. Now when I do 8th root of it, that means it's the same thing as 1 over 8th power. So the 8th root, and again, this is going to be, this means it's the 8th root. If you had this, then this means the square root, or you could think of it as the 2 root. So whatever number goes out there, whatever number is out here into the top left of the square root sign is the root of that. So going back here, we have the 8th root of x to the 5th on the top. So I can write x to the 5th parentheses to the 1/8 power. On the bottom, I have x cubed inside of parentheses. And now I have a 4 to the top left of that square root sign. So that means that's the 1/4 power. Okay. And then using my laws of exponents, x to the 5th to the 1/8 is the same thing as x to the 5th times 1/8. And on the bottom, I've got x to the 3rd times 1/4. And so that gives me x to the 5/8 over x to the 3/4. And now I'm going to use my rule that says that if I have something to a power divided by something to a power, and I have the same bases, I can subtract the exponents. So in this case, it's going to be x to the 5/8 minus 3/4. And how do I subtract those fractions? I get a common denominator. Common denominator here is going to be 8. So I don't have to change the 5/8, but the 3/4, to make that into an 8 in the bottom, I have to multiply by 2. So I have to multiply the top by 2. So that 3/4 is the same as 6/8. And when I subtract those, 5/8 minus 6/8 is negative 1/8. All right. And what does the negative mean? Well, as we saw in the previous one, it means 1 over x to that power. So I could write that as 1 over x to the 1/8, and that would be my answer. Or you could, if you wanted to, write it as 1 over the 8th root of x. Either one of these would be correct. And then last one we have here is we had the 3rd root of negative 2 over 3rd root of 54. Now, the first thing I want to point out of this one is some people may say, wait a minute, we've got a negative 2 under that square root sign here. Well, it's not actually a square root, it's a cube root. It's a 3rd root. So that's okay, because what that means is when I have the 3rd root or the cube root of negative 2, that means what number times itself 3 times times itself 3 times gives me negative 2. All right, I don't know what that number is, but I do know that there is a number that works, because it would be a negative number. If I did negative, whatever the number is, it's negative of it times itself 3 times would still give me a negative number. So I'm okay with having a negative 2 there. If it had just been a square root, I couldn't have a negative 2 there. Or if it's a 4th root, I can't have a negative 2. Anytime it's an even root, I can't have a negative number under the square root. But it's okay if I have an odd root. All right, so what do we do with this one? Well, I look at this and they're both to the 3rd root power. So I'm going to write this as negative 2 to the 1/3 power on top. And on the bottom, I'm going to have 54 to the 1/3. And now since they have the same exponents, I can rewrite this as negative 2 over 54 all to the 1/3 power. And from there, let's go down here. I can simplify this to 1 over negative 27 to the 1/3 power. So what I need to figure out, or let me do one more step here. So that's going to be the same as 1 to the 1/3 over negative 27 to the 1/3. And 1 to the 1/3 is 1. So really I just need to figure out what negative 27 to the 1/3 power is. All right, so let's break 27 down. What is 27? Well, it's 3 times 9, and 9 breaks down into 3, so it's 3 times 3 times 3, or 3 cubed. So negative 27 is going to be negative 3 cubed, right? And we can check that. Negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 is going to give us negative 27. So here I've got 1 over negative 3 cubed all to the 1/3 power. And now I can do my rules for exponents here. So I'm going to have 1 on the top, and then I'm going to have a -3 base, and I'm going to have 3 times 1/3, because I have a power to a power, and then 3 to the 1 times 1/3 is 1, so I get 1 on top with a -3 to the 1 power, or 1 over -3. So I get -1/3 as my answer. All right, so those 4 examples of some of the basic properties, the fundamental properties of using exponents. Hope this helps you with the homework.